One, yes. Two, no. Did he acknowledge that
I saw a head nod. I thought that was
could be
about
falling
right. Yep.
asleep already?
Yeah. No, no, it went back up again.
Okay.
Oh, you're doing great, Dave. And we're admiring your back room here. You did great.
So
Oh,
are we ready to go then?
yep. And we're being
Okay.
recorded.
Well, this session and the next two are going to be just a tiny bit different because John has sitting about has submitted three questions that he's curious about and would like to have answers to. And so so I'm going to do one question at the beginning of each session rather than at the end when I'm tired and maybe my mind is wandering. My mind is always wandering, but sometimes not wandering. Yeah. He says the United States national political system is based on two parties. How did that happen? Third parties have come and gone. Eugene V. Debs, Theodore Roosevelt, the Bull Moose Party. Eugene V. Debs was a socialist who even ran for president from prison. And Ross Perot, United We Stand. Uh, what is it? Harold Stassen from Minnesota. Strom Thurmond and the Dixiecrats. I mean, you can think, and plus we're going to add quite a few more up here. How did that happen? Third party candidates come and gone. The chances of a third party hopeful winning the White House are slim. Very, except that it has happened and once. And the two parties put up insurmountable obstacles regarding state ballots and current funding methods of presidential runs favor the two parties. Could a third party candidate ever win? Probably not. Or is the US just cursed and or blessed with our national two parties? Well, the reason we have two parties. Now keep in mind, I'm not going to say the reason we have Democrats and Republicans because it can be other parties as it has been in our history. But the winner take all nature of the electoral college means that there's no incentive to split votes. You're either going to win or you're going to lose. And you're going to win or lose the whole state, except for Nebraska, which has 5 electoral votes. Two go for winning the whole state. And then the other three are the three congressional districts in the state. So that's why in Nebraska, frequently the Democrats take one because that's around Omaha, and the Republicans get the other four. In Maine, it's two for the state, winning the state, and one for each congressional district in the state. So you can perhaps get all four, or sometimes the Democrats take two and the Republicans take two, or any mixture in between, one and three, etc. So it's the winner take all of the electoral college that's responsible for a two-party system. But it's not necessarily, but that doesn't mean we will always have the same political party. So I put up a little sketchy sketch here to help understand. So we began, and we've talked about this. Our original factions were the Federalists in favor of ratifying the new Constitution, the Anti-Federalists in favor and not ratifying, opposing it. So but here's the difference. The Federalists were this was these geniuses. Many of the founding fathers were on the Federalist side. It was a top-down political party. The anti-federalists who represented the rural areas and farmers and workers and so that was a grassroots party. They lost the initial argument. The Constitution was ratified, and what happens is though that split still existed in the government. Our first president is often called a federalist, but he wasn't. He was apolitical. He did not see himself as a member of any political party. And in fact, you'll remember back to my portion of his farewell address that I read to you, he was much opposed to political parties. So he saw himself as above the fray. And that's why, of all the presidents we've ever had, only Washington received a unanimous electoral college for his first term and a unanimous electoral college for his second term. And after that, all hell broke loose. But in his case, he was trusted. He was a trusted, honorable man of virtue. So Thomas Jefferson was not an honorable man, and in many cases, he was not a man of virtue. So he rather quickly earned George Washington's anger because he would stab him in the back with newspaper articles and then go, George, I don't have any idea how that developed. But he was the one feeding, and Washington eventually figured it out and cut off all communication with Jefferson. That didn't make Jefferson's mostly brilliant words in the Declaration of Independence any less valuable. But he was an operator. He was a politician. He understood politics. He created what became known as the Democratic Republican Party. So he and a number of so Adams would be our second president. He was a Federalist. He was political, and he was unpopular. So the election of 1800 was a lot like the election of 2024, the election of 2020, the election of 2020 of 2016. It was a hard-fought, bitter battle. One of the things that and John Adams was not a very popular guy. He was very thin-skinned. He was very much concerned about his legacy, very concerned about his legacy, and felt betrayed when he lost the election of 1800 to his arch rival and bitter enemy by that point, Thomas Jefferson. But that particular election brought out that there was a flaw in the Constitution that needed to be fixed almost immediately and was fixed almost immediately. And that's that when the Electoral College voted, they did not designate an electoral vote for president. And now here's an electoral vote for vice president. So what happened to John Adams in 1896 was he won the presidency because he got the most electoral votes. Thomas Jefferson, his arch rival, got the second number, highest total, so he became his vice president. So you had a president and vice president who didn't see eye to eye on anything. In the election of 1800, what happens is the combination of Aaron Burr running for vice president and Thomas Jefferson running for president, when they voted, both Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson got exactly the same number of electoral votes. Aaron Burr wasn't running for president, but effectively he was running for president. So after 36 ballots in the House of Representatives, because that's what happens when you have that situation, it goes to the House of Representatives, and then each state votes as a state. Not so your populous states like New York and Virginia and Massachusetts this time, their vote is no more valuable than little Rhode Island. So it took 36 ballots to sort it out, and then they immediately amended the Constitution to say you designate one vote for president, and then you designate another vote for vice president, and that ended that. Of course, Alexander Hamilton provided the winning vote, one of the winning votes for Thomas Jefferson. He said, I don't like Aaron Burr a lot. I don't like Thomas Jefferson, but I hate Aaron Burr a lot more than Thomas Jefferson, so I might as well go with the lesser of two evils, which ended up with the bitter rivalry between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, which ultimately led to the duel where Aaron Burr shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. So,
Question.
yeah, fire away.
So you're saying, so they didn't run as a package and
They kind of did run as a team,
but you're saying.
but they didn't make a distinct, but the Electoral College did not have within its structure the ability to designate, hey, I'm voting here for president and here for vice president. It was just an Electoral College vote. And then they took the top two would be the president and the vice president, not anticipating that the presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidate could get exactly the same number of votes.
Okay, what about, so both of these people were running for president?
No,
Oh, so
Aaron Burr was running for vice president. He was Thomas Jefferson's teammate.
so they were running for different offices.
Right, except that that wasn't designated on the Electoral College vote. And suddenly Aaron Burr, who wasn't running for president, thought, I have as much right. This august body has given me the same number of votes as Thomas Jefferson. Therefore, I have the same right to become president as he does, even though I wasn't running for president and he was. Jefferson was appalled. Yes, Betsy.
Clear how they fixed that?
Well, they made it so when you voted now,
How it's, you vote,
they amended the Constitution. That's the 12th Amendment, or no, yeah, the 12th Amendment is that. They fixed something else in the 11th that we don't, that's on how you do district proportioning for votes, but the 12th was the critical one. And that fixed that problem. That fixed that problem with the Electoral College, yes.
So are you saying that today we have a separate vote for in the Electoral College?
Yes.
Separate vote for president and vice president.
Yes.
Which happens to go along with the ticket, but theoretically it would have been possible, let's say.
It's still possible.
Right. I'm saying 2 years ago
Mm-hmm.
or a year and a half ago,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been possible for them to have elected
Democratic president and a Republican vice president.
or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Now, if an elector does that, obviously the Democratic Party provides a slate of electors and the Republican Party provides a slate of electors, and that's what you're actually voting for. So most of the time, they're not going to cause problems, but there have been what are called faithless electors who have voted opposed to what their state, whatever the state total was, and they voted in objection to it for some reason or another. States now have gone and made that illegal in some cases, that you cannot vote for somebody else besides who won the election in the state, because that can create all sorts of problems. So what happens is the Federalist Party, which is a top, collapses right at the time of the War of 1812 because they opposed it. In fact, the northeastern states threatened to secede. So the Southern Confederacy was not the first challenge to of secession. It was the New England states that threatened, and the Federalist Party just collapsed. So we had a period of time called the era of good feelings. So that was during James Monroe's presidency. He had no opposition. But so now theoretically you got a one-party state, right? The Democratic Republicans, and John Quincy Adams wins the election of 1824, but he loses the popular vote. It gets thrown into the House of Representatives, who vote state by state. And even though Andrew Jackson got a lot more votes than John Quincy Adams did, John Quincy Adams wins the vote in the House, not the Electoral College, because you didn't have anybody that had a clear majority. So the House had to make the decision. And so this was our original stolen election guy.
That really
That's
was.
literally, he ran, that was his platform, among other things, is the election was stolen from me. And realistically, he's pretty close to being on as far as that's concerned. So so you have disputes within the political party, as Madison predicted you would in Federalist 10. So if they don't have anything to argue about, they'll find something to argue about. And so some of the Democratic Republicans became National Republicans, and the rest became, instead of Democratic Republicans, now we're Democrats and the new Democratic Party. So some of those fled to what became known in the 1830s as the Whig Party. So National Republicans, our first major third party was the Anti-Masonic Party, was very popular, and it included people like Thurlow Weed, who was William Seward's advisor. It included William Seward, who ran on an anti-Masonic. They didn't trust Masons because it was a secret society. And that included, I'm trying to think of the great commoner from Pennsylvania, Thaddeus Stevens. He was an anti-Masonic. So they eventually came, and all of them became Whigs, including some Democrats. But the Whig Party managed to elect two presidents, both of whom died in office, and both of whose vice presidents were not really members of the Whig Party. So Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Well, John Tyler was a Democrat. And so they went from having, and William Henry Harrison Tippecanoe died less than only about 30 days after he was inaugurated. Yeah, I think he caught pneumonia at the inauguration. He spoke for, it was the longest presidential inaugural speech. And it said a lesson, don't talk too long on inauguration or you might die. So there was that. But his vice president did not carry on the Whig Party platform. And so the Whigs felt betrayed. Then in 1848, they elected Zachary Taylor, who was the winning general in the Mexican War, that they opposed. But they said, well, we think he's a winner. We're going to forget about all our scruples and platform. And Lincoln went along with that too. Some people wanted Henry Clay because he was a real champion. But that collapsed because by 1852, they took a real drubbing. It destroyed the party, which was breaking apart because of the fact of slavery. So 1852, slavery is a big issue. You'd just gotten through the Compromise of 1850. And so the Whig Party collapses into what are called conscious Whigs. Those are the ones that oppose slavery, and cotton Whigs, those who were in favor of supported slavery because of the cotton that was fast becoming the major export of the United States. So some Whigs defected to the Democratic Party. Some Whigs moved on and joined what became the Free Soil Party, the Liberty Party, the Know Nothings, also known as the American Party. And the Free Soil Party in 1848 ran, I think it was Martin Van Buren, and they got just enough votes in the state of New York that Henry Clay lost New York. They were people that normally would have voted for Henry Clay, but they didn't. They voted for the Free Soil Party, swung the election in New York over to the Democrats, and the Whigs lost. And that's why Lincoln would forever say, let's not throw away the good in an effort to get to the perfect. He said, and he became a strict vote counter. Nobody knew the number of votes in Illinois in each district than Abraham Lincoln did. So, and interestingly enough, this whole free soil platform, which was free soil, free speech, free labor, free men. So we'll come back because that becomes very useful here. So these third parties had an influence. They definitely swayed at least two presidential elections. So then comes this critical thing in 1854 called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And what Stephen Douglas did is he pioneered as part of, as a sop to the South, ending the restriction of slavery in the new territories, in the national territories. A lot of Democrats felt betrayed by that. It's what brought Lincoln out of retirement. He says, never before was I so incentivized to get back in that brought Lincoln back into politics. So what happens is a lot of Democrats didn't agree with that policy, Northern Democrats mostly. They became known as anti-Nebraska Democrats. They fuse with Free Soil Whigs, because Lincoln was still a Whig, the Liberty Party, the Know Nothings. So even though the Know Nothings were a rabidly anti-immigration party, they were not in favor of slavery, which is kind of weird in a sense. So we can discriminate against immigrants because we don't trust them, mostly because they were Catholic. And yet we are not in favor of slavery. So Lincoln said, well, there's a lot that I don't like about the Know Nothings. I will unite with them where they're right and divide away from them where I think they're wrong. And they unite in 1854 into this new Republican Party. They they do a great run in 1856. They probably couldn't win it, but they came in instead of a third party long distance away. It was a close election. And the Republican slogan was free soil, free labor, free speech, free men, and Fremont. So
Fremont was the
it was
candidate?
he was their candidate, John for the Pathfinder, who was actually his reputation vastly exceeded his abilities. He was a true cuckoo clock. But his wife was very influential, Jessie Hart Benton Fremont. She was very influential because her father was a senator.
Ah.
And so they came. And then in 1860, we end up with four parties running. You got your Republican Party, the Democratic Party broke into Northern Democrats under Stephen Douglas, Southern Democrats under John C. Breckinridge, the sitting vice president. So guess who gets to count the electoral ballots in 1861, but a guy that was like Al Gore was the sitting vice president, and he was honorable in that he did it right. And then you have this fourth party that had no platform other than the Constitution and Union, and that was under John Bell. And his vice president was a guy by the name of Edward Everett, former senator, former congressman, former president of Harvard University, former mayor. This guy, and the best orator in the United States. And it is Edward Everett that in 1863 in Gettysburg will deliver the real Gettysburg Address. 2-hour oration, memorized soap. It was printed up before he got up on the podium. People, it was in the news, and they followed it perfectly. 2-hour oration, printed out, perfectly delivered, and he was not reading from a script, perfectly memorized.
So did Lincoln actually give the Gettysburg Address that is attributed to him?
Oh yeah, those are his words.
Okay.
But it was on the outline on the program. It said a few appropriate comments from the President of the United States.
Ah,
So Everett spoke for 2 hours, Lincoln 2 to 3 minutes, and we remember nothing of Edward Everett and the real Gettysburg Address.
who came first?
Edward Everett. So the crowd sat through. No, this was their social engagement entertainment. They would have called, these were people that would sit through a 2-hour speech given by Stephen Douglas and then encourage Lincoln get up. Now you get another 2-hour speech.
They want their
And
money's worth.
oh, they wanted it. And that was what really was their entertainment. Unbelievable.
The great bulk.
So Lincoln got 39% of the vote, but he got 180 electoral votes because he won all the northern states. And this was the first election where the population of the North finally was able to supplant the 3/5 rule that that gave the southern states a disproportionate influence. That ended in 1860, and the South knew that it ended in 1860. And from that point on, while we may have had third parties, Eugene Debs, Bull Moose Party with Theodore Roosevelt, the Dixiecrats with Strom Thurmond, the United We Stand, and you think about, I'm trying to think who.
Ross Perot?
Well, Ross Perot, but I'm trying to think who ran in 2000 that people voted for him. The Green Party.
It was Ralph
Well,
Nader.
Ralph Nader was could have been a deciding factor in Florida. And the split, the butterfly ballot also led people to not vote for Al Gore, but they ended up voting for, I'm trying to think who the conservative Republican was that was on the ballot. About 2,000 people voted for this Republican who meant to vote for Al Gore. So, but that's why we have two parties. It's structurally, the structure of our government favors that. And so this is what's happened over time. But in 1860, effectively, the Republicans went from being a third party to the second party and, in fact, the first party. And they held that, they won a lot of presidential elections after that. So that takes us to Federalist 51. So we've set the stage. And Federalist 51, among other things, is the Federalist with the most memorable quotes. There's some good stuff in the other, but none of them have the number of quotes that this one has. So, to the people of New York, as printed in the New York packet, Friday, February the 8th, 1788, to what expedient, then, shall we finally resort for maintaining in practice the necessary partition of power among the several departments as laid down in the Constitution? Of course, that's Article 1, the legislature, Article 2, the executive, Article 3, judicial, and then I've got an asterisk here, because what you're going to see is not what Baron de Montesquieu wrote about in the Spirit of Laws that the founding fathers borrowed from. In the Spirit of Laws, the legislative, executive, and judicial departments were completely separate from each other. There was no way any of them could influence the other except for the amount of power each branch had. But there were no checks and balances. The three branches were completely separate from each other. The only answer that can be given is that as all these exterior provisions are found to be inadequate, so they're saying, Montesquieu, you got this wrong, the defect must be supplied by so contriving the interior structure of the government as that its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. Without presuming to undertake a full development of this important idea, I will hazard a few observations which may perhaps place it in a clearer light and enable us to form a more correct judgment of the principles and structure of the government planned by the convention. In order to lay a due foundation for that separate and distinct exercise of the different powers of government, which to a certain extent is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty, in other words, the three branches are essential for liberty, it is evident that each department should have a will of its own, and consequently should be so constituted that the members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others. Were this principle rigorously adhered to, it would require that all appointments for the supreme executive, legislative, and judiciary magistracies should be drawn from the same fountain of authority, the people, through channels having no communication whatever with one another. That's the separate and distinct branches. Perhaps such a plan of constructing the several departments would be less difficult in practice than it may in contemplation appear. Some difficulties, however, and some additional expense would attend the execution of it. Some deviations, therefore, from the principle must be admitted. The constitution of the Judiciary Department in particular, it might be inexpedient to insist rigorously on the principle. First, because peculiar qualifications being essential to its members, we were talking about that prior to the meeting, that you just can't have any Joe Blow walking off the street and be qualified to understand the law well enough. So they're saying we may have to make a few changes in that. So the primary consideration ought to be to select that mode of choice which best secures these qualifications. Secondly, and this was because the permanent tenure by which the appointments are to be held in that department must soon destroy all sense of dependence upon the authority conferring. So once they get there, it's a lifetime appointment. Suddenly, these other two don't have as much influence as they thought they might have had. So they're trying to think, we've got to be careful with this one right here. It is equally evident that the members of each department should be as little dependent as possible on those of the others for emoluments annexed to their offices. So you don't want who's to determine the salaries, and suddenly judicial branch, oops, we're taking your salary down to zero. That's prohibited. So, and the same thing is true of the executive. The executive salary can be set by Congress, but once it's set, it's permanent. Same thing here. The legislative branch, thanks to the 27th Amendment, the legislative branch is forbidden from voting itself a raise and then immediately benefiting from that raise. So the emoluments means basically money. So they're being careful because they know that that is a critical way and an all too easy way for the legislative branch to influence the executive and the judicial. So that's prohibited. But the great security against gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means for and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. So for Congress to resist encroachments from the executive, which is what we're seeing happen in the age that we live in, or the judicial to resist pressure from the executive. So he said, if the provision for the defense must be in this, made commensurate to the danger of attack. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So he's saying, we know people are corrupt. So we got to give corrupt people the means to oppose other corrupt people and hope that in balance, it works out okay. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? Another memorable government, we are government. So with all our flaws, we carry those flaws into the government. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls in government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the government, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. And so this is the grand experiment that Lincoln will refer to often. Can we successfully self-govern? A dependence on the people is, no doubt, the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. This policy of supplying by opposite and rival interests the defect of better motives might be traced through the whole system of human affairs, private as well as public. We see it particularly displayed in subordinate distributions of power, where the constant aim is to divide and arrange the several offices in such a manner as each may be a check on the other, that the private interest of every individual may be a sentinel over public rights. Checks and balances is what he's talking about. These inventions of prudence cannot be less requisite in the distribution of the supreme powers of the state, but it is not possible to give to each department an equal power of self-defense. In Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. The remedy for this inconveniency is to divide the legislature into different branches, House and Senate. This is not an accident, it's deliberate. As little connected with each other as the nature of their common functions and their common dependence on society will admit. It may even be necessary to guard against dangerous encroachments by still further precautions, as the weight of the legislative authority requires that it should thus be divided. The weakness of the executive, and here we're living in an age of an imperial presidency, we're seeing exactly the opposite. On the other hand, that it should be fortified. So he says, what's he suggest here? Well, an absolute negative on the legislature appears at first view to be the natural defense with which the executive magistrate should be armed. So give the president an absolute veto with no ability for the legislature to respond or to reciprocate. They did not go that direction. On ordinary occasions, it might not be exerted with the requisite firmness, and on extraordinary occasions, it might be perfidiously abused. May not this defect of an absolute negative be supplied by some qualified connection between this weaker department and the weaker branch of the stronger department? So between the executive and the Senate? So we got to think, okay, so he's proposing that we somehow give the Senate some means to deal with the executive, by which the latter may be led to support the constitutional rights of the former, so that the president makes sure that the constitutional rights of the Senate and House are scrupulously followed. If the principles on which these observations are founded to be just, as I persuade myself they are, and they may be applied as a criterion to the several state constitutions, okay, so our national separation of powers rests upon a foundation of state separation of powers, which rests on a foundation of local separation of powers. That takes us to, okay, so what do we mean by checks and balances? So Congress can check the president in these ways: by refusing to pass a bill the president wants, by passing a law over the president's veto. That is the way that the president does not have an absolute veto. 2/3 of each branch, the Senate and the House, can override. That's a high bar, but it's been achieved many times. By refusing to approve presidential appointments, that's the Senate, and the Senate, which did not stand up to President Trump's unqualified, inexperienced buffoons, all of whom became cabinet members. They did not take their role seriously. They took it simply politically, and that's a huge problem. By refusing to ratify a treaty the president has signed. Again, Senate only. Congress can check the federal courts. How? By changing the number and jurisdictions of lower courts. By the way, they can also change the number of the justices on the Supreme Court. We haven't always had 9. We've had as many as 10, as few as 6. And the one thing they quickly learned, don't have an even number of justices, because then you get ties and nothing happens. Using the impeachment powers to remove a judge from office, no justice of the Supreme Court has ever been impeached and convicted. At least one has resigned. Abe Fortas during the was caught on the take money during the Johnson administration. He was living a lifestyle much too high for the salary that the judicial branch provided. He had to resign by refusing to approve a person nominated to be a judge. Now that's not only a judge on the Supreme Court, but all federal judges must be approved. And all federal judges, no matter whether it's a district level, Court of Appeals, or Supreme Court, are lifetime appointments, which is why they're so important. The president can check Congress by vetoing a bill that has passed. He can check the federal courts by nominating judges. The veto gets a little bit complicated because sometimes the president doesn't want to veto a bill. He doesn't like it, but he doesn't want to veto it. So he just will not do anything. And if Congress is in session, after 10 days, it becomes a law without his signature. He's sending a signal, I don't approve of it, but I don't disapprove of it to the extent that I'll veto it. And then there's the nasty little trick, which is called a pocket veto, which if he hasn't signed it and it's and Congress adjourns, after 10 days, the president doesn't have to do anything. It's automatically vetoed. And that's called a pocket veto. Lincoln did that once, and greatly, he got all sorts of, it was called the Wade Davis bill. And it had to do with how Reconstruction was going to proceed at some time after the Civil War ended. And both Ben Wade and Winter Davis wrote big, long newspaper articles, published them criticizing Lincoln, but too bad. So sad, it never became a law. And the courts can check Congress by declaring a law unconstitutional, although the Constitution doesn't say that. That they basically, John Marshall took that power, getting it from Federal 78, that will be our last Federalist that we look at, because Alexander Hamilton says, who other than the Supreme Court would have the authority and the experience and the wisdom to determine whether a law was unconstitutional? So John Marshall, knowing Federalist 78, used Alexander Hamilton's logic to declare a court bill passed in 1792 unconstitutional, so that William Marbury couldn't get the justice of the peace position that James Madison refused to give him, Marbury versus Madison, which established the Supreme Court's right to determine whether something was constitutional or not. And the courts can check the president by declaring actions by him or his subordinates to be unconstitutional or not authorized by law. But of course, the courts have no enforcement capability. So how do you make the president, how do you make a rogue president adhere to your decisions? That's precisely what the Supreme Court is facing today, is what do you do when you have a rogue president? Do you want to offend him and have him blatantly ignore you? Or do you try to go as far as you can to mollify him, but not give him the right to have tariffs? You know, simple little thing like that. It's clearly unconstitutional. There are, moreover, two considerations particularly applicable to the federal system of America, which place that system on in a very interesting point of view. First, in a single republic, all the power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government, and the usurpations are guarded against by the division of the government into distinct and separate departments. In the compound republic of America, meaning, okay, we have the large republic that's our national government. We right now have 51 republics that are state governments. And then we have hundreds of miniature republics that are our local governments. So he says, the power of the people is first divided between two distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each subdivided among district and separate departments. Hence, a double, and I would argue a triple, security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other, and at the same time, each will be controlled by itself. Second, it is of great importance in a republic not only to guard the society against the oppression of its rulers, but to guard one part of the society against the injustice of the other part. So states versus states, or organizations of states against organizations of other states, the Union and the Confederacy. Different interests necessarily exist in different classes of citizens. If a majority be united by a common interest, the rights of the minority will be insecure. Correct. We're seeing that play out in real time. There are but two methods of providing against this evil. The one is creating a will in the community independent of the majority, that is, of the society itself. The other, by comprehending in the society so many separate descriptions of citizens as will render an unjust combination of a majority of the whole very improbable, if not impracticable. The first method prevails in all governments possessed by a hereditary or self-appointed authority. This, at best, is but a precarious security, because a power independent of the society may as well espouse the unjust views of the major as the rightful interest of the minor party, and may possibly be turned against both parties. The second method will be exemplified in the Federal Republic of the United States. Whilst all authority in it will be derived from and dependent on society, the society itself will be broken into so many parts, interests, and classes of citizens that the rights of individuals or of the minority will be in little danger from the combined interests of the majority. And of course, at this time, Madison was not thinking about if you're a minority, who do you turn to? Well, you turn to the courts. And that becomes in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s and 1940s, the predominant method by which African Americans, and in some cases women, were very successful in pushing back against those restrictions on their own rights. In a free government, the security for civil rights must be the same as that for religious rights. It consists, in the one case, of the multiplicity of interests, and in the other, the multiplicity of sects. So, did anybody ever think about why we aren't all Lutheran, why we aren't all Catholic, why we aren't all Methodist, why we aren't all Presbyterian, why we aren't all Baptist? And then we get Southern Baptist versus Northern Baptist. You begin to see there are so many different that none was able to reach a majority position in the United States. So in the case of religion, the multiplicity of sects, S-E-C-T-S, was the winning formula. And they were hoping, just as we have so many religions, we will have so many other interests that they will cancel each other out. So the view of the subject must particularly recommend a proper federal system to all the sincere and considerate friends of Republican government, since it shows that an exact proportion as the territory of the Union may be formed into more circumscribed confederacies, or states oppressive combinations of a majority will be facilitated. The best security under the Republican form for the rights of every class of citizens will be diminished, and consequently the stability and independence of some member of the government, the only other security. And that must be proportionally increased. Justice is the end of government. So not the end, it's not the end of government, it is the goal of government. Justice, according to Madison, is the goal of government. It is the end, the goal of civil society. It has ever been and ever will be pursued until it is obtained or until liberty is lost in the pursuit. In a society under the forms of which the stronger faction can readily unite and oppose the weaker, anarchy may truly be said to reign as in a state of nature, where the weaker individual is not secured against the violence of the stronger. And this is what Thomas Hobbes wrote about in his book, The Leviathan. It's what happens in the state of nature. Strong men overrun weak men. And it's only when the weak are gathered together and give up some of their individual rights to act in concert against that strong man that you have the beginning of a society. So it can be little doubted that if this, and this I like, it can be little doubted that if the state of Rhode Island, strange that he should pick the state of Rhode Island, the one state that did not attend the Constitutional Convention and did not join the United States until 1792, was separated from the Confederacy and left to itself, the insecurity of rights under the popular form of government within such narrow limits would be displayed by such reiterated oppressions of factious majorities that in some power altogether independent of the people would soon be called for by the voice of the very factions whose misrule had proved the necessity of it. In the extended Republic of the United States, of which Rhode Island was not a part of, as this was written, among the great variety of interests, parties, and sects, S-E-C-T-S, which it embraces, a coalition of a majority of the whole society could seldom take place on any other principles than those of justice and the general good. Whilst there being thus less danger to a minor from the will of a major party, there must be less pretext also to provide for the security of the former by introducing into the government a will not dependent on the latter, or in other words, a will dependent of this independence of the society itself. It is no less certain that it is important, notwithstanding the contrary opinions which have been entertained, that the larger the society, provided it lie within a practical sphere, is more duly capable it will be of self-government. And happily for the Republican cause, the practicable sphere may be carried to a great extent by the size of the United States, even just to the Mississippi, less than half of what the United States will become, was so much larger than any other European republic at this point, that by a judicious, that it will, happily for the Republican cause, the practicable sphere may be carried to a very great extent by a judicious modification and mixture of the federal principle, the mixture of national separation of powers, state separation of powers, and local separation of powers. Now, that led people, many political scientists, to erroneously decide that that meant that the federal layer was completely independent of the state layer, which was completely independent of the local. So Morton Grodzins, this is writing in 1960, the American form of government is often, but erroneously, symbolized by a three-layer cake. A far more accurate image is the rainbow or marble cake, characterized by an inseparable mingling of differently colored ingredients, the colors appearing in vertical and diagonal strands and unexpected whirls. As colors are mixed in the marble cake, so functions are mixed in the American federal system. Consider the health officer, styled sanitarian of a rural county in a border state. He embodies the whole idea of the marble cake of government. The sanitarian is appointed by the state under merit standards established by the federal government. His base salary comes jointly from state and federal funds. The county provides him with an office amenity, and pays a portion of his expenses. And the largest city in the county also contributes to his salary and office by virtue of his appointment as a city plumbing inspector. It is impossible from moment to moment to tell under which governmental hat the sanitarian operates. His work of inspecting the purity of food is carried out under federal standards, but he is enforcing state laws when inspecting commodities that have not been in interstate commerce. And somewhat perversely, he also acts under state authority when inspecting milk coming in from the county, from producing areas across the state border. He is a federal officer when impounding impure drugs shipped from a neighboring state, a federal state officer when distributing typhoid immunization serum, a state officer when informing the enforcing the standards of industrial hygiene, a state local officer when inspecting the city's water supply, and to complete the circle, a local officer when insisting that the city butchers adopt more hygienic standards of handling their garbage. So this was an argument that he made to President John Kennedy to help John Kennedy understand how complex our federal system is. And sometimes it's almost impossible to follow the threads of what national, state, or local authority is being enhanced and is being enforced. So that's where, I forgot the famous part. Publius Valerius Publicola. And this, the Yale Law School says that it's uncertain whether it was Hamilton or Madison wrote it. They are uncertain whether it's Hamilton or Madison, but Madison claimed it, and I believe he was exactly correct. Betsy.
We talk about Democrats being a big tent, and we have lots of different ideas and factions, but I don't see that principle working very well in this day and age.
Well,
it seems like the parties, for example, or the government that we have now, have tried to simplify it into this or that.
Right.
So that we don't have to come together and figure out how to proceed right now.
Yeah.
That's a perception.
Except that of course, we do have to get together and figure out, the big tent standard makes it very difficult if you've got a small tent group of white people who think that women are inferior. Oh, let me rephrase that. A small tent of white men
Not
that think women are not equal to men, or think that people of color are not equal to whites. That's very easy to stay in that little tent because nobody's challenging, nobody is presenting reality to you. Nobody's saying that, you know, some of these there isn't one size that fits all. And that makes our job as Democrats under a big tent, trying to provide for justice for all. That makes our challenge very, very difficult.
Like herding cats.
It is like herding cats. You love all the cats. Yes, John.
Would you comment on this generalization, that the Republicans want to stifle voting rights and the Democrats want to expand it, the Big Ten principle?
I think I'm not one vote early and often, which at times was true. If you read Walter Cronkite's biography, you will find that he voted, I think, 3 or 5 times in his first election that he voted in Kansas City, and he was escorted around by some union guys. So that we certainly don't want. But and other than the 14th Amendment or the 15th Amendment that bestows the voting privilege on African American men, but not women, we don't have the right of voting written into the Constitution. That would be an amendment that I think would be most appropriate, and that would prevent some of the issues that are going on. So I, as a Democrat, believe that it should be easy to vote. And don't put restrictions in, because if you do put like voter ID to save the voting, you're discriminating against those that are poor, that maybe, especially, you know, I might say, okay, I'm okay with a voter ID if the government provides it to everybody free of charge. No problem. Okay. I don't have a problem with that. But the whole design of it is effectively a poll tax, and poll taxes are unconstitutional. And it's going to discriminate against the elderly. It's going to discriminate against those who can't drive. It discriminates against women in the sense that your maiden name is not the same as your married name. So requiring a birth certificate still brings up, well, that's not your name now. So it's an incredible, so it discriminates against women, it discriminates against poor, it discriminates against people of color. And so that's why I dislike that type of legislation that make it easy to vote. Like in Australia, you're born in Australia, guess what? You're registered to vote.
But you have to vote in Australia.
Well, that's true. Or you can be fined. I mean, but still, I think we have to do in some ways, Democrats need to communicate how important the right to vote is, and build barriers, thick, sturdy barriers against encroachment on that right to vote, because we want to know what the real will of the people is, not the will of a minority, which is what we're in danger of creating today by such legal. Paul.
Do you believe that this proposed birth certificate identification, that the fact that it effectively disenfranchises married women or anybody else who changed their name, do you believe that is an oversight or a design feature?
No, well, I would call it a design flaw, but it is a design feature of that.
In other words, they
intend to prevent people from voting, because they know that the very people that they're preventing from voting tend to vote Democratic. So you have to put 2 and 2 together.
So,
Yes.
so I read something that kind of contradicted that.
Okay, you can leave now.
That's our big tech.
Act is generally the higher educated and better
better educated,
right,
better income people.
we'll get,
Have birth certificate, or excuse
Yeah.
me, have passports already.
Right.
They travel.
Yeah.
And a lot of, modern women do not change their name.
right,
So it's actually, it could have an effect of affecting trad wives
okay.
more.
Well, let's hope that that's
Who
the
would be
case,
Republican?
Who
But-
would be Republican?
but I would think that it probably isn't, or they wouldn't be pursuing it with such effort. Yeah, and thank goodness right now, as long as the Democratic senators stand firm, the SAVE Act is going nowhere, and it should go nowhere but to the trash can.
Say today he would not sign anything until that was passed.
Well, good,
It's, getting a birth certificate is also very challenging
yes.
for anyone.
Well, let's put another spin on that. Who else is likely not to have a birth certificate?
Or at home, if you're
Immigrant. So you see the immigrant connection to this as well.
Even though they become naturalized citizens,
right.
with
Exactly, they won't have a birth certificate because
United States.
in the United, and basically, I think Trump is going to lose the birthright citizenship status. The 14th Amendment is very clear. You have to ignore the plainly written language. And for those who are what we call originalists, meaning what did the people think at the time that legislation, the 14th Amendment, was created? Well, we have it. We have the discussions. We can go read what those congressmen and senators thought, and it's very clear what they were trying to prevent was the denationalization of African Americans, of freed slaves. And so who of course would at that time would have no birth certificate probably. The only thing is they know that they were born in the United States, and that was enough, and that still is enough.
so what's odd, you talk about originalists and amendments. One would think that at some point they would come up and somebody would be saying, in order to have a well-regulated militia
Well,
would become a really big part of that damn Second Amendment.
well, there is that. That's an example of Antonin Scalia deliberately misreading. He consciously, deliberately misread the Second Amendment. He took only the second clause, which was the right of citizens to have shall not be abridged. But he forgot there was a purpose tied to that. The purpose was to create a militia. Why did you want a militia?
Regulated militia.
Well-regulated militia. And the reason for that was, and we know that from the 13th article of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which James Madison copied word for word in the original proposal. And it's why did they want a militia? So that they didn't have a permanent standing army, which they deemed dangerous to liberty. There was a specific reason why you wanted the well-trained militia, was so you didn't have a standing army, permanent standing army. But we forget all about that. So we, as an originalist, we know exactly what they were thinking. It just isn't in the words of what became the Second Amendment to the Constitution. That's the problem. If they'd have kept all of George Mason's words as Madison wrote them, we would not be in this quandary. But they changed, Senate changed them, and we don't know why. John,
Just to be clear, the founders did not think about a military, even a navy.
oh, Navy was separate. Because that protected your shipping and that protected you against the evil enemy, Great Britain.
With no boots on the ground, so to speak.
They really didn't want a permanent standing army, right? They created one later,
Yeah.
but even at the time of the Civil War, I think the Army of the United States was something like 17,000.
Yeah.
And in 2 or 3 years, they were going to have 2 to 3 million in the north and 1 to 2 million in the south.
So the
My
founders
God.
thought that a militia would be enough.
It would be an adequate, they thought it would be an adequate response for what we were likely, fighting the Indians, you know how that goes. And the British occasionally, which also turned out to be true, did turn out to be true.
Mexican bandits.
Yeah.
Just think what a different budget we would have now.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
In this history of the development of the systems that we now have,
Yes.
what is the evolution of the electoral college?
Would you repeat that? I
Oh,
don't think.
she wants, what's your first name? Hattie wants to know how the Electoral College developed. It's written in the Constitution. So the Electoral College was the mechanism. They wanted to put a layer. They didn't trust the general public to directly choose the executive, just as they initially didn't trust the public to choose their state senators. They made it so that the state legislatures were empowered to choose the senators. So you had a layer of expertise and wisdom, so that supposedly didn't exist at the lower level, but your representatives would be wiser than you, the representatives who served in the state legislature, and they then elected the senator. What they didn't anticipate was that that would fall completely along party lines. So ultimately, the wisdom went to the wayside because it was politics that were being used to determine the state senator. Because if it wasn't for that, Abraham Lincoln, you remember the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates? Not only did Lincoln win the Lincoln-Douglas debates, he won the popular election in 1858. But the districts were gerrymandered because they hadn't gotten to the point where the census would take place in 1860 that would show the huge growth in the Chicago northern part of the state, which would then have given Lincoln the election as senator. But so the legislature, along political lines, elected Douglas as senator. And thank goodness they did, because Lincoln had a foil that he knew very well. He knew how to campaign and compete against Douglas. He even debated Douglas when Douglas wasn't there. It's called the Cooper Union speech of 1860, where he's debating Douglas, and Douglas has no opportunity to respond to him, and he just rips Douglas a new one. Shows how inept his thinking was, piece by piece by piece. And that one speech made it possible for Abraham Lincoln to become president. Had he not given the Cooper Union speech, it wouldn't have happened.
So is it true that we cannot get rid of the electoral?
We can, but practically speaking, it's going to require a constitutional amendment. And constitutional amendments require 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate and 3/4 of the states. And if you think 25% of the less populous states in the United States are going to agree to give up the advantage that they now possess, it's not going to happen. But that's the only way to do it. You either can eliminate it with the constitutional amendment, or you can modify it with a constitutional amendment. But that's the only means. And that's, as they would say in the 1860s, impracticable right now. Yes.
What about the difference, so that some states, like you were saying, winner take all and some divide their votes? Is that not outlined? Where is that outlined?
No, that's because states conduct their own elections. They are able by state law to determine how they wish to divide their electoral votes. A lot of states could do it, but most states find winner take all as a very easy way to deal with that.
So the federal government, because the Constitution says you have to have an electoral.
That's
college,
correct.
but your state can decide.
That's in Article 2. That's correct. Article 2. So you would have to find some. That's why I agree. National popular election, but times change. What happens when you get a lot more rural people than the educated people that we tend to mix with? Then we don't want a direct popular election. We want the protection of the Electoral College. Right now, the Electoral College is favoring small rural states.
They're not necessarily uneducated.
No, you do see some people that common sense said you should be voting a lot differently. There's a very famous book called What's the Matter with Kansas that asks that question. Why are you not voting? Why are you voting against your own self-interests? And that's particularly true of MAGA in many cases. That they have no idea. I don't think they've not reasoned it out to understand what the consequences of your voting behavior is.
Okay, yeah, and comment on my structure and see if you can give me a sense, but it looks like conservative forces are buying up more and more news media. The news media will frame the information that people get to make MAGA look like the only reasonable choice.
Yeah,
Comment on the structure and comment on the,
I'm depressed about that,
okay,
to be honest. I think it's horrible when you have like the Washington Post, which democracy dies in darkness, and Bezos is turning off all the lights. It's incredibly expensive to have a journalistic staff that can do the real research that's necessary to follow. We wouldn't have had a Watergate had it not been for two dogged reporters on the Washington Post. And they were there because the owner of the Post said, we'll support you. We're paying for it. That's very expensive. And now in this very complex world that we live in, and that was a much simpler world in the 1970s, as hard as it is to believe. Now you have dozens of sources of information, most of which are unchecked, and many of which are misinformation, and some are deliberate disinformation, because you have Russian agents and Iranian agents. They're feeding misinformation into the system. And the problem is we have to be careful of accepting something because that's what we already believe. Where Democrats are usually pretty smart, and we want to take a look at all sides of an issue and then realize, okay, this is nonsense. Even if it's coming from a Democratic source, it's nonsense. And we have to be very careful. But you need those journalists out there digging in and finding that. We have no idea how much corruption is going on in the Trump administration. We just know it's a lot. And we know that the cabinet is a bunch of sycophants at this point, most of whom are unqualified to be in the jobs that they're in.
Well, and even some of the Substack journalists who are trying to do that
Right.
kind of research are so small in their scope to get those words out. And we have, like you said, so much coming at us.
Right.
We aren't sure who's right.
Right.
Right. Look at
Yes. We all, we as Democrats, we said, just give us the facts.
Yeah.
But I've heard a number of the MAGA people, and they're saying that they have the facts, and they honestly believe they do.
why they do. Look at what Fox News did just
Yeah.
this week.
Yeah, Fox News they're deliberate liars.
I mean, with
Well, it
their-
was created by Roger Ailes specifically to lie. It was a
Right,
propaganda
right.
machine.
my point was what they, during the dignified transfer.
I saw that. They ran
Fox News
because Trump had his ball cap on,
ran tape from years ago.
right, pretending that it was.
They didn't, so if you watch, they did apologize after.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not.
But
what
how
they
many
did.
of them even caught the
And they
apology?
ran it on 3 different things.
Right.
It wasn't like a mistake. They
No,
do it
no, they knew
purposely.
what they were doing. They were embarrassed by President Trump wearing a baseball cap to this very solemn ceremony.
So they put out disinformation.
They do.
And those
They
people
do.
that watch that shit believe
Yeah.
it.
I know it's sad.
Pretty true.
It's frustrating to see what's happened to the Washington Post and see this great news organization being the Bezos making sure that the president is happy. Don't come up with stuff of all the corruption in the White House. What do you mean we didn't have a plan to start the war in Iraq? What do you mean we didn't have a step 2, step 3, step 4 figured out ahead of time? What do you mean we really do have enough missiles to fire forever? That's not what I hear. And sadly, it was a Tomahawk missile that destroyed that school with the children in Iran.
But
They're still
Trump said that
investigating.
other people could have that
Today he said.
Now yeah, no, that's not what you said at first, of course. And that's not what you'll say 10 minutes from now. And then 20 minutes after that, where you shift again. Yes, Ted.
Or saying,
We call it Man of Doom or something like that.
Awesome.
Voice of Doom.
what's your thing?
How many satellite, not satellites, but drones does it take to take down an airplane?
I,
How many, what?
how many drones does it take to take down an, I don't know.
Could it be two?
It could, I think it could be just one
Yeah.
if you had the proper drone and with the proper guidance to hit the plane in the right place.
I'm also hearing right now that, you know, drones are becoming the weapon, and therefore, our leaders are in danger, and it isn't because of a rifle, but it's because of the drone.
Mhm.
The other is that I'm hearing more on whatever news or radio or whatever, or newspaper thing I read. Our election is not gonna happen in 2026. Because what's gonna happen in this Iran thing is that it's going to, I mean, all this talk of having Federalist
Mhm.
Constitution.
Right. Is he gonna declare an emergency?
It's his goal.
That is his, but the only advantage is,
Out there to do
Yeah.
the job.
the only advantage is we do at least know about that. He's repeated this way of operating enough times that good Democratic lawyers are out there trying to build a bulwark against it by being actively hammering away at what he's trying to get the courts to be able to see clearly what the danger is, and that sometimes courts have to act quickly, which our courts normally don't.
There was a movie out a couple of years ago called Civil War. The two militaries were from the original military.
Mhm. Well, I agree with you that I don't, and it's sad to say this, but in spite of all the training that they got at West Point and Annapolis, I don't think you can trust our military in the hands of unscrupulous individuals like a Pete Hegseth. He's getting rid of the people that could stand in his way.
But they're still there.
Yeah, that was done. Yeah,
They're still somewhere.
well,
Well, and was.
There's a reason they got all those generals in the same room,
yeah,
so they could look at facial expressions while
yeah,
that was going on.
yep, oh, I agree. Well, this is just sheer nonsense of calling them all, it was stupid to call them all together. That's for the reasons that they
That they
actually
said.
Yeah,
But I believe it was to see facial
I wouldn't
expressions,
doubt that.
that they were scanning the crowd, and anybody who rolled their eyes is
Yeah,
out of
on the
there.
chopping block.
Yep.
What is the
And
next
some
one?
guy by the name of Stalin got rid of a whole lot. of
Yeah, the purges of 1936. Yep, if you know your Russian history.
Got rid of it. It
Yep.
really hurt them.
Yes, that's why they did so badly for such a long period of time in the World War II.
Although
Because they're
what's
capable
interesting
leaders.
is we had a general in the late 30s who had a purge also, which was the only reason we were successful, because they had a bunch of stodgy people who were ready to fight the last war,
Mhm.
and he knew he needed people that thought more independently and were ready to
Are you
fight the next
thinking
war.
of Marshall?
I think it was Marshall.
Marshall was in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to be the commander of the invasion force for D-Day, but Roosevelt said, no, I need you here.
But he did.
He was part of the brains, and then it was Admiral King. You saw some admirals that were aggressive and thoughtful, and some generals that did not want to fight the last war. And were smart enough to know how not to. But we still got caught flat-footed. Any other questions?
What is next?
Next is Federalist 65, where we go into the Senate portion and look at some of the powers that the Senate has, according to Alexander Hamilton, particularly the power of impeachment. So we do a deep dive into what Alexander Hamilton expected to happen when impeachment was invoked. So, warning everyone, it's a political process. Yes,
It's kind of an off.
we're well off topic comments are quite welcome here.
What, or like Canadian legislature, what is that called, where you have?
It's a
different
parliament.
parties
It's a
that-
parliament, a
Canada,
multi-party system with a parliament.
repeat they're holding their ears
Oh,
because they can't
what-
hear the question.
What
Use your
was,
side voices.
what kind of government does Canada have? It's a multi-party parliamentary system,
Like the British.
like the British, because it used to be part of Britain. So, but still, so you have a federal government there, and then you have your provincial governments. But it's vastly more complicated. It's more complicated because you need coalitions in many cases. And it's hard to know what coalition is going to work and what coalition isn't going to work till you actually try it.
People.
And are the people happy with it?
There's always pluses and minuses for everything.
Yeah, nothing's perfect.
When is the next?
A week from today, 6 p.m. You can pick up a copy of Federalist 65 is over there. You can pick it up to take it home with you today. Same time, same place. And then we have Federalist after that, Federalist 78. So we're in our last two.
2 times, yeah.
So
We're in the
now,
home stretch.
I didn't.
does
think of this.
anybody
Going to the next-
online have any questions?
Impeachment,
Impeachment.
impeachment. Okay, Paul, back to you.
Does anybody online have any questions? Speak now, raise your hand, unmute yourself, or forever hold your peace. And Dave Fox says, thanks for being here, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the marble cake and the
thank-
conversation.
Thank you, Dave, for making this headquarters so sparkly clean.
It's on the table too. I just put a couple out if you don't have one.
Yeah, if you don't have a pocket constitution, grab one.
Yes, I did.